Tony sat in the dimly lit room, his hands shaking as he recounted the events that led him to this moment. He took a deep breath and began to speak, his voice barely above a whisper. She pushed me into this, Tony admitted, his eyes filled with regret. I never wanted to do it, but she made me believe it was the only way. Tony's wife, Sarah, had always been a strong-willed woman. She had a way of getting what she wanted, no matter the cost. Tony had always admired her tenacity, but he never imagined it would lead them down such a dark path. It all started with a simple disagreement. Tony and Sarah had been arguing about money, as they often did. Sarah was always pushing for more, never satisfied with what they had. Tony, on the other hand, was content with their modest lifestyle. But Sarah was relentless. She wanted more, and she was willing to do whatever it took to get it. She began to pressure Tony, manipulating him into making decisions he never would have made on his own. And then, one fateful night, Sarah presented Tony with a plan that would change their lives forever. She wanted him to commit a terrible sin, one that would secure their financial future but would also haunt them for the rest of their days. Tony was torn. He knew what Sarah was asking of him was wrong, but he also knew that she would never let it go. She had a way of getting under his skin, of making him doubt himself and his morals. In the end, Tony gave in to Sarah's demands. He committed the sin, his hands shaking as he did so. He knew he would never be able to forgive himself for what he had done, but he also knew that he had no choice. As Tony finished his story, he looked up at the detective sitting across from him. The detective's expression was unreadable, his eyes searching Tony's face for any sign of remorse. I know what I did was wrong, Tony said, his voice filled with emotion. But she pushed me into this. She made me believe it was the only way. The detective nodded, his gaze softening slightly. He could see the pain in Tony's eyes, the regret that weighed heavily on his shoulders. I understand, the detective said quietly. But you have to take responsibility for your actions. You can't blame someone else for the choices you made. Tony nodded, his eyes downcast. He knew the detective was right. He couldn't continue to blame Sarah for what he had done. He had to face the consequences of his actions, no matter how difficult they may be. As Tony sat in that dimly lit room, he knew that his life would never be the same. He had allowed himself to be pushed into committing a terrible sin, and now he would have to live with the consequences for the rest of his days. But as he looked back on the events that had led him to this moment, Tony knew one thing for certain. He would never again allow someone else to push him into doing something he knew was wrong. He would stand up for himself, no matter the cost. And he would never again let himself be swayed by someone else's desire. Thank you.